Welcome to Living the Spiral. This is a place to slow down, take a breath, and listen to the rhythms moving through your life. Here we explore astrology, human design, the I Ching, and elemental ancestral wheels of the year from cultures around the world. These are old maps and living languages that help us sense where we are in time, what is asking to unfold, and how we belong to something far larger than any single moment. In each episode, we trace patterns in the sky and in the body. We weave myth with lived experience, intuition with practice, and the personal with the collective. Living the Spiral is about learning how to move with change instead of pushing against it. About meeting transitions with curiosity, integrating polarities, and remembering that every season carries its own powerful wisdom. When you begin to listen to the cycles, life starts to feel more connected, more meaningful, and more alive. I'm your host, Allison Dale, and this is Living the Spiral podcast. Hey everybody, welcome back to Living the Spiral. This is Allison, and today I want to do something that I've been meaning to do for a long time, which is just really lay it all out, this whole map, all of these systems that I've been working with for so many years now, and how they're related, and why I think they matter right now in this current specific moment in time, beyond just helping you understand yourself a little better. When I first got into human design and astrology and the I Ching, I came in through that personal door, my chart and my type and my profile. And a lot of times we come into one of these practices when we're going through a lot. I think most people go through coming to a practice of astrology, not just out of a general interest, but out of that personal lens of something resonating during a time that feels challenging, where it's not easy to just Google it and figure out what's going on, but you need a little bit more depth into the personal nature. So that was a real door for me. Astrology I came into, I'd say 15 years ago or so, and then learned about human design in 2019 and the gene keys in 2020. The I Ching, I had a copy of an I Ching book on my bookshelf in high school, so that's been probably the longest system that I've worked with. But I've loved how all of these have come in at various points in my life and really opened things up. And over time, I've really come to feel like that's just one part of the bigger picture, the personal lens. So today I want to talk about the larger container where all of these live. So if you've been in my world for a while and you've heard me reference the Fuxi sequence or the 64 gates or the Wheel of the Year, you've probably nodded along, but never quite had the architecture laid out. And this episode will be a good place to start for a lot of people who are just discovering my work, or if you've been with me for a while and still don't quite see how it all lines up. So if you're new here, welcome. This is definitely a labor of love, a practice of love that I've been doing for quite some time now. And I'm so excited to have more people on this journey of walking the wheel together. Yeah, if you've ever tried to understand any of these systems, astrology, the gene keys, and human design or the I Ching intersect, this is definitely a good episode for you. So basically, the through line is that all of these systems are at their root technologies for locating yourself inside a living pattern. These are all systems that say you're not separate from what's moving around you. The season is not happening to you. The planet is not just a backdrop. You're inside the spirals of time and the spirals of life. And when you actually feel that, when it lands in your body and not just in your mind, something deep shifts inside. It's definitely happened for me when I started learning about embodiment and somatic practices, breath work, somatic experiencing, these types of practices, while I was simultaneously studying astrology and human design. I felt that I would learn about something and look at a diagram or a chart, and it would seem kind of over my head But through time, by learning in that way and also integrating into the body, I did start to feel a really deep sense of belonging, connected to what the pulse was, the global pulse of what's happening on the planet with other people, with the collective, with the earth itself. And really starting to connect with the fact that the memo that is being delivered on a week-to-week basis is really written in the history of the land and the sky, the cosmos, the turning of the year, the seasons. So that's really the why behind why I do what I do. It's a connection to belonging, really. It was a desire when I was going through some hard things to understand my personal life, my personal trajectory, and felt a lot of resonance there. But then also over time, as I've started to do more readings and connect with other people about their personal experience, there really is this collective pulse, this season-based pulse, and this earth-based frequency that we are all attuned to, whether we know it or not. So let's start at the beginning. I think the oldest question that humans have asked as we try to locate ourselves in time is, where am I in the larger story? What part of the cycle am I in? What is the land asking of me right now? How can I coexist and be in relationship with the land that I need to survive? And what does the sky say about the quality of this moment as all of our human ancestors watch the skies, watch the transits of the bright fixed stars, the planets, the wandering stars across the sky? There was a certain relational quality that every one of our human ancestors, if you go far back enough, was asking. And what I think is really remarkable is that across different cultures all across the globe, with presumably no contact between them, people arrived at remarkably similar answers about the sky being a clock and the seasons having lessons within their archetypes, noticing that patterns repeat over time and that inside that repetition there is a deeper meaning. So this is the deepest root of everything I'm going to talk about today. And I'd love to start with the I Ching because it is the oldest of these systems and it underlies more of what we do in human design and the gene keys than most people realize. So the I Ching is known as the Book of Changes, and it's one of the oldest texts in the world, if not the oldest text. It originated in China, and the roots of its core text go back to at least 1000 BCE, probably much further. Its roots actually predate recorded history, but it was formalized into a book during the Warring States period around 500 to 200 BC. So I've heard it told that the I Ching is 6,000, 7,000 years old. It's been codified and collected into different texts, and the formal text was 1000 BC, but it definitely goes back further than that. And the legend around the I Ching involves two figures, Fuxi and King One. So Fuxi is a mythological emperor who was semi-divine, and the story goes that he received the 8 trigrams, the basic 8 trigrams, which are known as the Bagua, by observing the patterns of nature. And he saw them as marks on a tortoise shell, but these marks related to the flow of water and the way things grow and die and grow again each year. And he saw that reality is made of 2 forces in relationship, which are yin and yang, receptive and active. And these 2 forces, when they're stacked in 3s, produce 8 fundamental qualities of energy. So the 8 Bagua, the 8 fundamental forces of nature, are thunder, water, mountain, earth, wind, fire, lake, and heaven. So these elements are descriptions cosmologically of how energy moves in the universe. And then we have King One, who was a king who was imprisoned by the Shang dynasty around 1000 BC. And he was said to have taken Fuxi's 8 trigrams and stacked them into pairs to create the 64 hexagrams. So hexagrams are 6 lines that are either broken or unbroken, and they create 64 possible combinations. 8 times 8 is 64. And King One wrote commentaries on each one of these hexagrams. And then his son, the Duke of Zhou, wrote the line commentaries on the lines for each one of the 6 lines. And then Confucius later added his own layers. So the 64 hexagrams are essentially a complete map of the way that energy transforms. All of the ways that situations and qualities of experiences change can be found somewhere in these 64 hexagrams. And a lot of people come to the I Ching with a divination practice, casting yarrow sticks to get the 6 lines or stones or coins to determine what lines are going to show up within a casting. And so there is a divination practice that is a deep practice that's associated with the I Ching. But the hexagram that you land on through that divination practice shows you something about the pattern that you're in right now as it relates to this larger experience of the elemental nature of the world. It's a mathematical and symmetrical sequence where each hexagram is paired with its opposite. That's more narrative and more about the story of how one thing changes into another. But both are maps of the same bagua, the same hexagrams, and they're just different ways of reading the same 64 patterns. But the 2 trigrams on top of each other to form the hexagrams and the 6 lines make up these 64 hexagrams, and the mathematics of it, especially when it related to the Fuxi sequence, is super amazing. So basically the sequence that human design uses on the mandala, the Fuxi sequence, is also known as the earlier heaven sequence. This is mathematical ordering that was not formalized by Fuxi himself, but by an 11th century Song dynasty philosopher named Shaoyong around 1060 CE. Shaoyong arranged the hexagrams in a specific way, starting from all broken lines and moving systematically toward all solid lines, with each hexagram differing from the next by the minimum possible change. And so the result of this ordering is a perfect binary sequence. If you assign yin, the broken lines, the value 0, and yang, the solid lines, the value 1, and then you read the lines of each hexagram from bottom to top, the Fuxi sequence counts in binary from 0 to 63 without missing a single step. So all yin is 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, and 1 yang at the bottom becomes 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, which is 1. 2 yang at the bottom is 4 zeros and then 2 ones, which is 3. And you go on like that all the way to yang, which is 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, which is 63. So Shaoyong drew this as a square diagram with 8 hexagrams across and 8 hexagrams down to create a grid of 64, with each row and column following the same precise logic. The top line alternates yin and yang with every single hexagram. The next line alternates every 2 hexagrams. The line before that every 4, and then every 8, and every 16, and every 32. And then the bottom line is yin for the first half of the sequence and yang for the second half of the sequence. But essentially this is just naming how binary counting works, where each position doubles the interval of the one above it. And Shaoyong formalized this 6 centuries before a German mathematician would rediscover the same logic completely independently, and then realize when he encountered the diagram that someone had already done this. So the fusion of East and West coming together, it was Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, who had been working on binary arithmetic since 1666. And he was obsessed with this idea of a universal language. Characteristica universalis is what he called it, this symbolic system that could encode all of human knowledge and thought. And binary appealed to him because of philosophical and theological reasons as much as mathematical reasons. It was a system where everything reduces to 0 and 1, to nothing and something. In this, he saw a reflection of the relationship between God and creation. And it was a sacred elegance to him, not just a practical one. He was also really interested in China, and he edited a collection of letters from Jesuit missionaries in Beijing in the late 1600s. And through this work, he began corresponding with one of those missionaries, who was a Frenchman named Joachim Bouvet, who lived in the Forbidden City in Beijing as an advisor to the Kangxi Emperor. Beauvais was a figurist, and the figurists were a faction within the Jesuit mission who believed that ancient Chinese texts contained hidden traces of original divine revelation, that the sages of China had been unknowingly transmitting something sacred. So when Beauvais learned about Leibniz's binary work, he thought about the hexagram diagram that he had been studying, and he wrote to Leibniz in early 1701, from Beijing. And that letter arrived to Leibniz in 1703 by ship. And in that letter was a woodcut of Xiaoyang's Fuxi square diagram. So within a week of receiving Bouvet's letter, Leibniz sent his paper Explication de l'arithmétique binaire to the Paris Academy. So he sent this paper for publication to the Paris Academy, and he titled it with direct reference to the Chinese source, and wrote that the hexagrams corresponded perfectly to binary numbers from all zeros to all ones, and that the ancient Chinese were far more mathematically sophisticated than people in Europe had assumed at that time. So the Fuxi sequence was a relatively modern rearrangement by Xiaoyang of a much older and more traditional sequence. So the King 1 sequence is actually an older recorded sequence. Xiaoyang's reordering of Fuxi's 8 by Bagua, or 8 trigrams, was done later, a couple thousand years after King 1 sequence. And so the King 1 sequence, when you try to read it as a binary, doesn't produce any orderly numerical progression at all. It is just the Fuxi and Xiaoyang arrangement that has this mathematical property. So it was based on this particular woodcut of the I Ching that was a mathematical rendering of an older system. But Leibniz didn't know that there were 2 different systems, and he thought he was looking at Fuxi's original work. Scholars later noted that the Chinese had never interpreted the hexagrams in this way. The End said that the binary structure was always there, waiting for someone to read it that way. So there's a little bit of discrepancy there, but Leibniz became that reader who brought East to West and saw something real in this ordering, but he saw it through a lens that the original creators weren't necessarily using. So what Leibniz did with this encounter with this woodcut was viewing it as a binary arithmetic, as a means to discover philosophical and theological truths. Practical computing applications for binary code came later, and in the 19th century, George Boole formalized Boolean logic, and then Claude Shannon in the 1930s, showed that binary arithmetic could be implemented in electrical circuits. And from there, the electrical circuits became the transistor, and the transistor became the chip, and the chip became your phone and everything else that you're using to hear or read this episode. So a direct line can be drawn from those hexagrams to the device that you're using right now. There's binary code used in every computer, every smartphone, every satellite, every piece of software. They all work on the basic principle of zeros and ones. It's definitely the question of what Xiaoyang was doing when he arranged the hexagrams that way. He wasn't looking at it through as a mathematician. He was finding the underlying pattern in hexagrams that is there, has been there from the beginning. And the Fuxi sequence in its square arrangement shows you how the 64 hexagrams relate to each other structurally, which ones are mirror images of each other and which ones are complementary opposites, and where the pairs are, and what the geometry of transformation looks like when they're all laid out together. So the mandala in human design uses this sequence for the same reason. It's arranged in a circle in the Fuxi order, and in that circle, the 64 gates create a map where every gate's relationship to every other gate is visible. It has a complement directly across the wheel in its polar opposite gate, and its neighbors in the sequence beside it are the trigrams that link it to the seasonal turning. So the structure here reveals meaning that the narrative King 1 sequence doesn't show you. And for me, I remember learning about human design and seeing the cool body graph and feeling connected to the body graph because it looked like a lot of collage art that I'd been making with old anatomical textbooks. And I think the body graph image really pulls people in because we are embodied beings. And when you see a human design body graph, there's something more curious almost than an astrology chart or than a square grid. It's like, oh, there's my body. What can you tell me about my body through this system? But beyond that, when I saw the mandala for the first time and knew that the body graph's energy centers were correlated with the mandala, with this circle of time, and how the sun and planets and moon move through that circle of time, when I learned that, I was instantly just very curious about where the order of the numbers came from. And I really had a hard time actually accessing that information. It wasn't readily available. There wasn't an easy way. I Googled it. I don't think AI was available yet. Maybe it would have told me. But at that point, back in 2019, I remember just Googling it and asking everybody who I knew that was into human design. And everybody just seemed to have an answer that was like, oh, that's just how it is. Like, a lot of human design lore comes from Ra's voice. He heard a voice. I got this transmission of all this information on the island of Ibiza in Spain in the 80s. And some people who are into human design were just like, oh, well, it was the voice. The voice said it was that. But as a investigator line that's very prominent in my human design, I really wanted to know the deeper reason for the ordering, because it seemed like the baseline of this entire system was in the order of these gates. I was like, why is gate 17 in Aries season? And then why does it go to 21? And why does it go to 51? Like, what is that? Because I had read the King 1 sequence or version of the I Ching in high school and understood it to some degree. I'd heard about an association with a binary code, but it took a little bit of digging for me to find out what this actually was. And when I found it out, it was beautiful. It was this most ancient mythical emperor of China who came across it by witnessing nature and the patterns within nature. Fuxi is a counterpart of Nuwa, who is the female kind of goddess, original creator of the world. And Fuxi was the male counterpart to this who taught humanity, we know, how to fish, how to hunt, how to build. And it's a beautiful image of the creation story from China. And Fuxi being the discoverer of these elemental wisdoms. I felt very good when I discovered that information. And then from then on, it's been like all systems go into human design because I got to the baseline of where it came from. And that is one thing that I will say that I do find frustrating about human design as a system, is that I found a lot of it comes from these ancestral ancient systems. It's a fusion of the Zodiac and the I Ching and the Hindu Brahmin chakra system and the Kabbalah tree of life. And when I found that out, it all sounded a little bit overwhelming. Okay, sure, but what and how? And I love synthesis, so I was intrigued. But what I have found frustrating is that there is a lack of reverence for these original systems. within the teachings of human design. You have to really dig to get to them. And I know that history isn't for everyone, and finding out the origins isn't for everyone, but I do find that without that, you're really just, yeah, there's a lot of emphasis on just kind of receiving this as a new packets of information, when it really does have history and prehistory going back to ancient humans and our relationship with nature for millennia, that I feel like deserves to have some reverence paid, and it deserves the credit that is due. So that was one of my qualms about that system at large, and so that's why I do tend to bring in the I Ching. There's gate descriptions and keynotes in human design that kind of look at the hexagrams in their own way, with their own language. The gene keys then, which is an offshoot of human design, is another system that applies different words to these original 64 hexagrams. And I think that that's okay. I'm not a purist. I think there's a lot of beauty in the evolution of these systems, but I do believe that it's really good to go back to the source and not necessarily take that as the only word or the only way, but to integrate it in and see how these more modern systems might have evolved or might have taken some of their wisdom from this ancient, amazing I Ching. So that is that. That's my spiel on some issue I have with some of these more modern systems, but that I also love. The deeper I get into them, I find a lot of value in them as well. These binary system, just to close that up, I'd say that it's just pretty fascinating that two systems that were separated by at least 6 centuries or more across the width of the world found the same binary pattern independently. Neither of them was building technology or the internet, but here we are running our entire civilization on the logic that was already inside these broken and unbroken lines long, long ago. So it's very, very cool. What I love about the I Ching is that it has no interest in telling you what to do. It's not about prediction, but it does show you the shape of a moment and really allows you to feel into the energies of that moment. I feel like it is a very different relationship with time than most of us in the West were raised in, where we are asking questions of whether we should act or whether we should wait, or if something is good or bad. And the I Ching really has the information within it that this is the quality of energy right now. It's not bad or good. It is what it is, and it will change. We can feel into it and move with it. And that's the nature of water. That's the nature of wood. That's the nature of the elements that we are surrounded by. So moving on to the Zodiac, because that was my original love and where a lot of you listening to this are coming from, I believe. I'd love to hear in the comments, wherever you're listening to this or reading this, what your primary source is, or your primary system that you work within, whether it's astrology, human design, or the gene keys. I believe I've been in the astrology world longer, so I'm going to go out on a limb and say that the Zodiac is the cycle that more of us might be familiar with. But as far as the roots of the Zodiac go, the roots of Western astrology are Babylonian, going back to ancient Mesopotamia and Sumeria around 2000 BCE or earlier. The Babylonians were really extraordinary astronomers, and they tracked the movements of the planets with precision that really astonishes modern scientists still. They worked from clay tablets and watched the sky over generations and noticed that the sky was a clock, that it told time, that there were patterns and spirals and cycles within it. And the position of the sun and the moon and the visible planets were the gods that marked the seasons and the floods and the harvests. These ancient people, the sky and the earth, were in a beautiful cyclic conversation. The 12-sign zodiac, as we know it today, solidified around the 5th century BC in Babylon. And the Babylons divided the ecliptic, which is the sun's apparent path through the sky. They divided that into 12 equal sections, which were each named for a constellation that were nearby. The constellation that was rising over the horizon during the spring equinox was Aries. And so Aries was the first section of the zodiac based on the fact that was the spring equinox constellation. And they were tracking the quality of light through the seasons. Aries, that section of sky being that catalytic fire of spring where the ram pushes through. Cancer is the inward turn of midsummer. Capricorn is the bare bones of deep winter. And these, at that point, were not associated with personality types or psychology in any way. They were seasonal energies that repeated every year dependably as the sun moved through all 12 and creates the seasons. So the way that we've all come into astrology for the most part is through a psychological and personality-based lens, which is not all too modern. It's been around for a long time as well. But the initial formation really had to do with the seasons, with our ancestors' relationship with the seasons, and how the constellation backdrops for these sections of sky that the sun moved through each season were kind of like the backdrop of a play. The constellations were something to refer to mark that season's energy. And so the season of Aries, being the season right after spring equinox, stays the same now, even that the constellations have shifted based on our point of view from here on Earth. That is called the precession of the equinoxes, where the Earth wobbles on its axis and every 72 years moves 1 degree, so that over time the backdrops of constellations behind the planets and the sun appear to change. And I just have to hit on that because when I first started studying astrology, that was kind of the biggest question, was about, why aren't the signs aligned with the constellations anymore? That's changed, so why hasn't the astrology changed? And my argument for that with tropical astrology is that tropical astrology is a season-based system. It's a system that's based on our relationship with the earth and the changing nature of what's happening here on Earth within nature, and not so much about the stars themselves. They're more of just the backdrop of the play. And they come from a certain point in history when this system was codified. So that's a little bit about that. I could probably do a whole episode about that, but I'll leave it there and get back to the history of the zodiac a little bit. Let's see. Alexander the Great conquered Persia and Egypt in the 4th century BC. And at that point, Babylonian astrology collided with Egyptian astronomical traditions and then with Greek philosophy. The Greeks gave astrology its philosophical backbone, particularly the Stoics and the Platonists, this idea that the cosmos is a living, intelligent whole, and that the movement of celestial bodies reflects and participates in the unfolding of events on Earth with humanity, with people specifically, was really more of a Greek notion. And that's where, the Hermetic tradition of as above, so below, as below, so above, as within, so without, that comes from the Hermetic tradition, an Arabic text called the Emerald Tablet. But that concept was very much integrated into astrology during the Greek Hellenistic era. This idea that the earth is not just the recipient of this cosmic turning, but also a participant in it. So for me, the zodiac, the history of the zodiac, again, could definitely do an episode on each one of these, and maybe I will. I just find it incredibly moving that these two traditions, the I Ching in China and the zodiac in the ancient Near East, were developing around the same time with no contact, presumably. I always like to say presumably because we don't know what was going on back then. There might have been some contact, but probably not based on what we know. But both of these were doing the same thing of reading the pattern of energy on Earth as it moves through the cycles of time that we can note by the placements of the planets and the stars and the luminaries over time. They were finding qualities in the Great Turning and locating themselves inside the larger patterns. Having been raised in the 20th century, 21st century, it's where there was so much emphasis on linear thought or on progress or on hierarchical thinking, the great chain of being, all of these things going back to pre-Age of Aries, going back into the time before that kind of one foot in front of the other kind of ram's horns charging forward energy came into the picture. Before that, when these systems were really initiated, was the age of Taurus, and before that, where it was a deep relationship with the land. Taurus is a sign that is related to the senses and to the land, and for me, the earth, the resources. And for me, this speaks to a time when we had such a deep relationship with the lands that we lived in, and we had a deeper relationship with our senses and our bodies, and that's when these systems came into being. And then over time, of course, they were codified and changed and put in containers that fit the ages that we've been in. The Age of Aries being very charge forward warrior type of era, and then the Age of Pisces that we're currently in being a lot more spiritual and based on personality and spirit. So going back to the origin story of the Taurian nature of the I Ching and of the Zodiac as this relational, cyclic, sensual quality is really what this larger project has been about for me. This deep intelligence that our ancestors knew, that we were all embedded in a living world with its own rhythms. And that's something that I think that we are coming back around to, but that we have forgotten for quite a long time. And we're really trying to remember. So the third tradition I'll bring in is the Wheel of the Year, the Celtic and Germanic and pagan Wheel of the Year. That's another system that I use that's aligned with the Zodiac system. A lot of people who work with astrology and the Zodiac also work with the Wheel of the Year. The Wheel of the Year itself, the pagan Wheel of the Year, is a fairly modern wheel that was created by neo-pagans and neo-Wiccans in the 1950s. It was codified, and that was where the terms Ostara and Mabon were added into the wheel. But other of these holidays were brought from the ancient Celtic Wheel of the Year that could be older than the than the I Ching and the Zodiac, and the various European pagan Wheels of the Year. And what the Wheel of the Year is, when I'm referencing that, is the solstices and the equinoxes, and then the 4 cross-quarter days in between them, the midway points between the solstices and the equinoxes. And that creates 8 holy days that are celebrated in neo-pagan traditions. It seems like this wheel has become more and more popular. I think it's a beautiful tradition to mark the solstices and equinoxes, as well as the cross-quarter days, as points within the year where we can mark the passage of time very easily with that astronomical understanding. And so when I speak to these, know that the modern pagan Wheel of the Year is a fusion of various European pagan traditions. But we have Samhain, it's related to Halloween in the beginning of November. Imbolc is in early February. Beltane is May Day in the beginning of May, and Lammas or Lunasa is in early August in the beginning of Leo season, or the middle of Leo season. So the Wheel of the Year is definitely in conversation with the Zodiac in this way. Their energies confirm each other. The cross-quarter days are all in the fixed signs of the Zodiac. The Zodiac is already a Wheel of the Year, and the seasons are already written into the signs that way. But the traditions that come from the Celtic and European pagan traditions are translations of the same pattern into different languages and different ceremonies and celebrations. And the traditions from the Wheel of the Year came from people who organized their entire lives around these thresholds. In Northern Europe, where it was less city-state civilization at the time, a little bit more agrarian, a lot of these ceremonies were fire festivals about the return of the sun. They were wisdoms that translated when to plant and when to harvest, when to go inward and when to put yourself out in the world, and when the veil was thin between worlds and when the ancestors were close, and when the fire needed to be lit and the gathering around that fire needed to happen. So they're very fundamentally human ceremonies and celebrations and rituals that are associated with the pagan Wheel of the Year, and I love to see how they intersect with the Zodiac. So human design and the gene keys are the other two systems that I work with in this Living the Spiral project and in my readings and in my work. So I really do love these two systems. They're beautiful ways of thinking. They're a little bit different from each other, but I do feel like discovering these led me back into a deeper understanding of the fundamental ancient systems that they're based off of. So human design, in the late 80s, a man named Ra Uru Hu had what he described as a mystical experience or a voice transmission. And because the system stands on its own regardless of how it came through. But what came through for Ra was a synthesis. And it took the 64 hexagrams of the I Ching and mapped them onto the zodiac wheel. So the 64 gates, the 64 hexagrams arranged in that Fuxi sequence in the mandala span the full 360 degrees of the zodiac. And this really means, just to break it down, super simple, is that the zodiac wheel and the I Ching wheel are the same wheel, that they always were in various languages and various systems. And the human design system just really made that explicit. They lined up the exact degrees of the dates of the zodiac with the exact degrees of these different gates. And the sun transits all of the 64 gates throughout the course of a single year. So it's about 5.5 days per gate that it takes the sun to transit through that gate. So the solar year, which the zodiac has always described in 12 signs, was broken down into 36 decans by the Babylonians, and that's breaking the zodiac signs into 3 parts. So there's always been a subdivision of these seasons, even in the same system. But human design essentially breaks down the zodiac into about 6 gates per zodiac sign, equals 64 gates around the 360 degree wheel. So each gate in that way has its own quality and its own theme, a kind of textured nuance, a micro season to that larger season that is being described by the zodiac. And your birth chart in human design is basically a snapshot of where the sun, moon, and every planet were in those 63 gates during the moment you were born, as well as another birth chart, like a snapshot of where all of the planets were 88 days or 88 degrees of the wheel before you were born. And that is the end of the second trimester so it's the time when, for the most part, humans within the womb have all of their organs formed. They are really just cooking at that point. So it's this idea that there is a birth chart of the end of the second trimester, that 88 days before, which is almost a 90-degree angle, kind of a square aspect to your birth chart, which is where the planets were when you were born. That 88 days before is your kind of embodied resonance signature, and the birth chart information where the planets were is how you consciously perceive the world. So they're known as unconscious planetary placements and conscious planetary placements, or design and personality placements are different words for those two different birth charts, essentially, that are superimposed onto the wheel. And when you look at a human design chart, for the most part, black is the color that is used to show the wheel of the planets, the snapshot of the planets at your birth, and red is the color to show the planets before you were born, at the 88 degrees before you were born. That creates, a double birth chart, essentially. More information to work with, and then those planetary placements along the wheel are put into the body graph, and each center of the body graph is aligned with the chakra system. The initial chakra system, the Hindu Brahmin chakra system, we were 7-centered beings, and the human design energy centers, there are 9 of them, where there has been a kind of splitting off of some of the energy centers into 2, but the basic way that the human design and the I Ching connect is through how the 64 gates, 64 hexagrams are applied to the zodiac, which are then plugged into the body graph. Each of the gates has a specific location in an energy center in the body graph. And whenever 2 of those energy centers are connected by having 2 of those gates activated, that means one of those centers is defined for you, which means you have reliable access to information from that energy center. If you have an open energy center or a white energy center, it means that no planetary information or placements was activating the gates that are in those energy centers. And that means that you're more responsive to the environmental conditions relating to that energy center. But just wanting to kind of give insight into how all of these systems intersect for those of you who are new to this work. So the gene keys, moving on to that system, this is a system created by Richard Rudd, who was a student of Ra's at one point in time, and has taken the 64 hexagrams into a more contemplative and esoteric reading than Ra did. I would say that Ra's genius was the synthesis layer, and was really also kind of the way he presented the information was a bit provoking, I would say. He likes to hit the language that he uses is a lot. It can kind of jostle you a bit. And Richard Rudd took these same 64 hexagrams and wrote a book called The Gene Keys, where he looks at various frequencies, 3 different words related to each hexagram. And one is the shadow level, one is the gift level, and what is the siddhi level. And so where human design really describes the mechanical structure of how all of these systems intersect, Gene Keys really inquires on a more contemplative level, where you are taken through the shadow, gift, and siddhi with just a beautiful poetry, I would say. I really enjoy the poetry of the Gene Keys. And you can kind of look at the frequency of each of these hexagrams with like how they show up in different ways in your life and in the world. So the shadow in the Gene Keys is the contracted form of the energy, kind of how that energy shows up when we're in fear and when we're kind of cut off from source, where we're in a vigilant, hypervigilant kind of survival-oriented space. And the gift level of that same gate, that same hexagram, is what emerges when we stop fighting the shadow and start working with it. It's usually a process where you work from shadow into the gift. And then the siddhi is the fully flowering potential. It's like the illuminated expression of that frequency, the transcendent expression, the ultimate potential of what could be with that frequency. So with any gate, you have the I Ching hexagram and its ancient wisdom. So sometimes I Ching, you kind of have to read between the lines or recognize that, oh, that's coming from a time, for instance, when concubines were a common role in society, for example. And so there will be certain things that don't feel as innately familiar reading the I Ching, but there are lots of different translations of the I Ching. I have a really great app on my phone that I will post as well. And I love it because it lets you switch between different books. It has a library where you can shake your phone and cast the coins, cast the sticks. There's lots of different ways that you can use it as a divinatory practice. You can also just read straight through the books. You can journal about it. It's just called I Ching, Yijing, which is a different way of spelling than the I-Ching. And there are two different ways of kind of Latinizing the Chinese characters. But yeah, highly recommend this app. I will post a link to it in the show notes. It guides you. It has 5 different texts. Nigel Richmond's Language of the Lines, which is a contemporary version. The I Ching by Brian Arnold, a modern English interpretation. It has the original first edition by the co-author of I Ching, The Oracle of the Cosmic Way, Carol K. It has another Nigel Richmond, masterly modern approach to the original I Ching imagery. And then it has a transcription from Chinese with pinyin and a clear English translation by Gregory Richter. So it's cool to actually go through. My investigative line in human design is going deep, but I love kind of switching off on the same hexagram between these different translations and just seeing what comes through. So that is one way you can kind of get deeper into the I Ching if you like apps. And the human design, my favorite app for human design is called Neutrino app. It's a wealth of information and resources and just really easy to use to look into the structural function of what body graph parts are lit up for you based on where the planets were at your time of birth and 88 days before. It goes into all of the different substructures and levels of the human design system. So Neutrino app's pretty awesome. And then the Gene Keys, I love reading. There's also an audiobook of the Gene Keys book that is free on Spotify, but you can get the audiobook, and the narrator is a British woman who is very serious and very eloquent, and I enjoy listening to her. But reading it and highlighting it, I always have it next to my bed just to kind of peruse and contemplate the shadow and the gift and the city level of these frequencies. And the Gene Keys, you can also sign up on the Gene Keys website for every time that the sun transits into a new gate, that you can get an audio transmission from Richard Rudd in your inbox about that specific gene key. But it's kind of a limited time audio transmission that you get access to during the sun's transit through that key or that gate. So just to be super clear, if you reach this point and haven't gleaned that from what I'm saying, the hexagram, the gate, and the key are all the same name or different names for the same thing. A 6-line hexagram from the I Ching, essentially. And I wish there was a better word that could encapsulate all of them. And I've talked to other people who work with multiple systems and are just like, oh yeah, somebody I talked to said that they called it a fractal, 64 fractals of experience, which I kind of like. Gua is another name for a hexagram in Chinese. So ba means 8 and gua means symbol, I believe, or picture. And so ba gua would be the 8 pictures of the trigram. And so but gua is also a word for a hexagram. So could use gua or fractal. But for now, it's the gate/key/hexagram. And yeah, the 64 energies are placed around the zodiac. So the zodiac position tells you when in the year this energy is most alive in the collective field. And I love looking at the gates, the keys, and the hexagrams and how they relate to the archetypes of the zodiac season. I like to see how the evolution of Aries, the ram, is kind of seen through the lens of these changing gates, the changing 6 gates of Aries season. But these are just 4 lenses for the cycles of time, for living the spiral throughout the year. And it's been pretty fun too. I'll do a specific episode soon about each one of these systems so I can get deeper into the lines of human design, for example, the variables, the different sequences of the gene keys. There is so much more, obviously, to each one of these systems, but the way in which they really all relate back to the seasons and humans' relationship with the seasons over time is what this work is all about. So, bringing in the Wheel of the Year one more time, these 8 Celtic holy days or pagan holy days correspond to 8 specific gates on the human design mandala. And what I've really gotten into this year is that all of these holy days, these equinoxes, solstices, and cross-quarter days are corresponding with the 8 gates of the G center, which is the center in the middle of the human design body graph. And that's the center of identity and direction, the center where the heart would be, kind of like all of the fascia and tissue and everything that surrounds the heart. And that's the center that's in the middle of the body graph again. And so at each one of the 8 holy days, these very important seasonal markers throughout the year, the sun is transiting a G center gate. And that just feels very beautiful, where as we go through the Wheel of the Year and pass through each of these seasonal markers that so many of our ancestors from across the globe have marked in one way or another, the Wheel of the Year is written into the mandala this way. And so it really shows in this very beautiful way that the land and the body and the sky are in this beautiful conversation with each other. And the 64 gates are this vocabulary that they share. So this is what my new project, the Mandala 64 Walk, is about. Every time the sun moves into a new gate, I'm writing about it on Substack. So I would love you to join me there if you listen and would like to learn more about these micro seasons, these sub-energies of each zodiac season, or just how to connect deeper to the earth in the moments that we're currently in. You can join me on Substack at livingthespiral.com, and those are all written transmissions for each gate that the sun transits through every 5.5 days. I write in a little article trying to keep them super short and sweet and to the point, but they include a creative prompt and a somatic exercise to attune to the energy center in the body where that gate shows up, and keynotes, information, musings, some art that I'm doing that I'm sharing there as well. So I would love to have you join for this journey. And I am also putting out a call for guest authors, guest artists, guest posters. If anybody has familiarity with the gene keys or human design, with your chart or the I Ching, and you would like to write about one of the gates, you can have it in your chart defined or not. It doesn't really matter to me, but if you have a desire to kind of get yourself and your work out there and cross-pollinate in this kind of way, I would love to have you. I have a few people signed up for different gates, and however it flows in, will be what it will be. But I am opening up the call, so you can send me a message wherever you're listening to this, or an email at allison@hearthandspiral.com. And I would love to chat with you, or I'll send you a survey, a form that you can fill out. Not a survey, but a form you can fill out about that gate. So there's not too much back and forth, but just kind of, I'd love to hear more perspectives about how these gates, these keys, these hexagrams, these zodiac seasons show up. So yeah, reach out. I would love to hear from you. And join me even if you don't want to write. Yeah, join me to walk the wheel. It's fun to pay attention to the omens in your environment that are showing up as the sun transits through each gate. Just kind of paying attention to the sky, to the earth, to the books that you're reading, to the conversations you're overhearing. We're going to be doing all 64 gates. We started with gate 25, the first gate of Aries season, the gate of innocence. And we're moving now through Aries season, and we're going to go all around the whole wheel. So come and join. Because sometimes I get so caught up with the details that I forget to talk about the why behind this. So basically, when you know that the sun is in a particular gate, particular part of the wheel, let's say gate 36, which is the end of Pisces, the last degrees before the spring equinox. Gate 36 is the gate of crisis. It's known in the I Ching as the darkening of the light. I call it the birth canal gate. It's this moment right before a breakthrough happens where everything feels like it's too much, like there's a lot of crisis and pressure. And if you feel that, and if your life feels cramped and pressured and like something is about to give, and then you just have a knowing that the sun is in gate 36 right now, there's something that shifts, at least for me in my body, taking into account all of the different energies that we continuously all live with, but that something might be potent in the moment. And it might seem simple, like sun sign astrology, where you're only looking at where the sun is and attributing that a person's personality only to the sun. That kind of gets scoffed at. That's not as deep and dynamic as astrology actually has the potential to be. But what I love about the specificity and the minuteness of the gates, how it divides the zodiac sign up, is that oftentimes the sun, the solar transit through one of these gates does really come with a certain resonance of that type of energy beyond what the sign alone could tell you. So knowing that you're a Pisces with the sun in gate 36 will tell you a little bit more about you than if you just knew you were a Pisces sun, for instance. So there's a specific quality of collective energy that has a name and a shape that has been passed down throughout millennia, throughout so much time. And so it's not arbitrary. It really does connect with the seasonal arc, and it feels like belonging. It feels there's a deep sense of surrendering to relationality with the earth in my body when I notice that I'm inside a pattern that includes me and includes my experience, but also might include how the plants are doing at that moment and how the animals are doing and how your neighbor's doing. And so, knowing that, and also knowing your own gates, the ones that are in your design, the ones that are activated by the planets at your birth and your 88 days before, you really start to understand why certain seasons feel like coming home and others feel unknown, like unknown territory. You can also determine through these systems kind of why certain people light you up. There are ways that the synastry, the interplanetary alignments between you and another person can really activate the body graph as well. And so that's not random. It's definitely just these resonance fields that are being cast where two charts with different gates activated are talking to each other. And there's two people in the same frequency or two frequencies trying to find the harmony between them. So when we bring it back to the sun and the solar transit, the sun is transiting the same gate for every person on Earth at the same moment. And there's something that I find really beautiful about that, where it's like the weather report, but on this ancestral cosmic translation. And it's like this collective field that we're all moving through together, whether we know it or not. And these systems are just a way of making that visible. I also have a calendar that I've just created. It's a Google or Apple or Outlook or whatever digital calendar that you use. I have a calendar that I've created that tracks the human design solar transits as the sun moves through all the gates, as well as a lot of the astrological transits over the course of the year, and you can integrate it with your existing calendars. It's kind of a fun way that I love to use to see how different people's birthdays that I have in my calendar, to see what gate they were born in, what kind of full moons, new moons, and astrological aspects and transits are showing up along with my day-to-day plans through the year. So you can get that by becoming a paid subscriber at Living the Spiral. And also I'm doing a series of rituals. I did one for the spring equinox that was a lot of fun, but a ritual for each one of the 8 days of the wheel of the year, the 8 holy days, and the next one will be on Beltane. So I hope you join me for that. That's part of the Living the Spiral paid subscription membership, but I'll also be offering those as one-offs if you want to try it out. And you can find the calendar as a one-off download as well if you'd just like to get that and plug it in. My website is hearthandspiral.com, and there's a shop there. I make art, put art on clothes sometimes. So there's a lot of ways to engage and support this work if you're listening. So thanks for that. But before we end, I wanted to talk about one other thing, which is a little bit unexpected. I wasn't expecting to add this into this episode, but I've been sitting with an essay that I read recently from a writer that named J.M. Star Night Dwell on Substack, who's a new Substacker, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about the way that they wrote about astrology and kind of where it stands in the midst of all of the narratives that are happening right now in our current reality. And the essay is about eschatology. So the essay is about eschatology, and eschatology is the study of endings. It is the study of final things, of last things. And that's coming up a lot these days with a lot of talk about end times that are happening in mainstream media and in politics. But one thing that this Star Night Dwell Substack was talking about, which I find really clarifying, is that we're living inside this current political and cultural moment that's being actively shaped by people who believe in a very specific kind of ending, kind of final ending, a rapture, an end times, right? This sense of linear time running out based on prophecy, this sense of Armageddon that is not so much as a metaphor, but actually a policy goal. And there are people at the highest levels of power right now in the US and elsewhere who are making big decisions about wars and about global policy and global disasters based on eschatology that says that history has an endpoint and that we're approaching it, and that is destined to be the truth. I do want to just sit today as I talk about all of these cyclical systems from ancient times and sit with this notion as a collective of what we believe and what story we're living in, because there are people with strong and unified narrative convictions right now that are moving the world in very specific directions. It's hard to say if they actually believe it or are using a narrative for their own power and own gain, but there is so much talk about the end times at this point and the prophecy and the destiny of that. And then there's a lot of people who are more pluralistic, have different belief systems, and can kind of feel overwhelmed and paralyzed by that eschatology that's happening. And so what J.M., this author, points out about astrology specifically, and by extension all of these other cyclical systems that I've been talking about, is that astrology is by nature based on cyclical models of time. Astrology it's very clear that it's not linear and it's not headed toward a final point, that there are always cycles that come up again from the past and that will happen again. That's built into the philosophy. That's built into the science and the belief system that the nature of time is cyclical. It's not only cyclical, but spiralic, where it's not coming back to the exact same moment. When a planet goes through a synodic cycle, it comes back, but everything has changed and it's never in the exact same position and same relationship as all the other planets before. But it is coming back to a place in space and a place in time. And so this underlying philosophy that, astrology is getting super popular, as is human design, as a lot of these systems are far more popular than they were 5 years ago or 10 years ago, and are only gaining in popularity. And it's similar with the eschatology. The end times doctrines, those are also gaining in popularity. And so we're talking a lot about the nature of time, kind of under the surface right now. And a lot of people aren't mentioning the word time, but it really is a lot about how we perceive time. And so the study of endings really does look completely different when we apply it to cyclical time. It's just the fact that you can't have a last thing when everything keeps returning and coming back around. So it's kind of a counter eschatology to what we're hearing in a lot of mainstream circles and political, geopolitical circles. So, when the sun, for example, when the sun moves through gate 36 and into gate 25 and spring arrives, that doesn't mean that the year is actually over. Pisces into Aries means that the wheel has turned and the cycle has continued into a new phase, but it's never truly an ending and a new beginning. And, when Samhain or Halloween comes, the year is dying and being reborn, but it's not over. And so it's this fundamentally different relationship with time that carries true ethical weight. And I do believe that this is an important conversation to have, because if you believe the story continues, if you believe that life renews and that the land returns after it goes fallow and that the pattern keeps renewing, then you can make really different choices and you have to live differently. You can't just let it all burn down because you know that it's going to come back around. And so this author also called something out that I think we all need to hear, which is that astrology as it's currently practiced has largely been captured by a very individualized, very personal, psychological, late-stage capitalist frame, which is all about me, my chart or my type or my shadow work. And there is, like I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, a lot of value in that. It's a very beautiful entry point to this system of thinking, and it's deeply personal. We are all living in bodies, and we all have our personal experience. But it can also become another way of really feeding into the ego while the world outside is contracting. There can definitely be some spiritual bypassing that happens within these systems of just looking at it through your narrow lens, or reducing everything that everyone does to the reasoning of the planets or the stars or Mercury being retrograde, for example. And in this essay, JM called this narrative failure. Basically just when the story that we're telling doesn't match what's actually happening or what's actually needed. So the antidote that, as I see, is to remember that these systems that we're talking about here in this episode, human design, gene keys, astrology, the I Ching, the wheel of the year, all of these systems were originated in collective technologies and are about the health of the collective. And the Zodiac was always about the quality of the season for everyone. And we all have different ways of responding to our environments. But the quality of the season was the way that these beautiful myths were built. And the I Ching was always about a map of how energy moves through all situations, not just through individuals. And then the Wheel of the Year was really always a communal practice where fires were lit on hillsides and whole villages, whole agrarian communities would move through the thresholds of time together. So for me, it really does. I've thought a lot about like, why do I keep doing this work and why do I always keep bringing it back to seasons? Why do I always keep bringing it back to this collective quality, even though it's not as sexy to post about that on social media, for example. I love to talk about individuals and I love to do one-on-one readings with people and see where their life is intersecting with these larger cycles and qualities of time. But at the baseline, what I come back to is this grounding quality of it as a belief system, as a counter to the end times narrative that we are going to continue to live through more and more cycles. And that really does change how we're meeting the moment. So, we're responsible for what comes next because there is a next and there's always going to be a next. So it's all about a different relationship to endings than maybe some people have. And for me, it's tracking the sun through these 64 gates and marking the cross quarters and the equinoxes and solstices and doing this work within community, within an embodied perspective. It really allows to embodying the idea that the spiral just keeps on continuing. And that's what's at stake with this work. At the deeper level, it's not just that it helps you understand yourself, though of course it does, but it also orients you inside a living and renewing pattern that asks something of you. It asks you to be in relationship with it and to show up for the season and to meet yourself with realness as far as where the season is landing and to be responsible across time. I think that the belonging that I was seeking and that many of us are seeking when we look to find reasons why in astrology or in human design, why am I this way? Why did that situation happen? It's what we're really looking for is belonging to something larger than our own story. And that can be the earth that's holding us when we lay on the earth. That can be the skies above that have continuity across the years. And that can be the community and the community of ancestors, the web of roots that is all of our ancestors that are woven together in the past cycles that have created these stories, these myths, these philosophies. And so there's belonging to more than just your own story. And that's why this work is so powerful for me. So it's definitely a different story than the one that's being told at the highest levels of power right now and that's being propagated across the land. I think about how many people are just so numb to the stories of terror. It's almost numbing us to the point where the end times almost seem palatable. They almost seem desirable because it's almost like, well, if things are getting so bad, like what about the apocalypse? Hey, that can't be so bad. And then what about the second coming or the thing that comes after that is certainly going to be better. There is a darkest before the dawn kind of narrative, but it is more of a linear structure of getting to the very, very end rather than maintaining the continuity of the spiral. So I think these stories matter, and I think they've always mattered. And so we just have to ask ourselves what narrative we're living in, subconsciously, consciously, and think about how radical it is to feel time in a different way than maybe you were raised, or maybe a different way than the overculture would deliver. Thinking about time in your body, in your practices, and in your choices that you're making every day, about how do you see the future based on how you see the past and the present moment. So these systems that I'm talking about here are not answers to those questions, but they definitely give a way to work with the material and a way to keep asking this question about what story we're living in. And they provide a way to find belonging while we keep listening to the larger networks of space-time, to the earth, to the planetary neighbors, and to how our bodies are in relationship with that. So we can continue to ask this question and keep listening and stay inside the spiral and tend to the spiral instead of waiting for it to end. So that's what all this is for me. These maps are definitely not belief systems that you need to adopt. And I'm sure that you wouldn't, even if I said so, but I definitely do not look at any of these systems as dogmatic end-alls. But definitely I treat them as ways of listening and attuning and being in relationship with patterns that are moving all around us, seasons, the sky, the cosmos, the stories of ancestors, and it just is this turning of the wheel that completes and begins again. I'd love to go deeper into any of this, and we'll be offering some more classes over the course of this year. But if you want to start now going deeper into any of this material, you can join me over on Substack at livingthespiral.com. And that I have a sub-series called the Mandala 64 Walk. That's like a Deccan walk, if you're familiar with astrology, where you walk through the entire year with information about the solar transits through these gates, and kind of pay attention in your environment to how those gates and their energies are showing up, and how they show up in your body, how they show up in your creative practices. So we're walking the sun through all these 64 gates in real time, and I'll be posting once per gate at the beginning of the sun's ingress into that gate. And it'll include information from the I Ching and the gene keys as well. So it's free to follow along. And again, paid subscribers can get the live rituals for each of the 8 G center gates, the solstices, equinoxes, and cross quarter days, and that calendar that I mentioned, the Human Design Astrology digital calendar. But if you're newer to human design specifically, and you want to understand your own design in this larger context, I do readings, and you can find my different reading types at hearthandspiral.com. My books are open, and I'll put some links in the show notes for that as well. But thank you all for being here and living the spiral with me and being radical in your relationship with time. I think it means a lot right now. So I'll see you in the next episode. We'll be talking about the full moon in Libra, which is happening on April 1st. So I'll see you there for that. Have a beautiful, beautiful day.